Imagine sitting down to watch this really glossy, neon-lit television drama.
Right, something super stylized.
Exactly, just full of glamorous pop stars, perfectly styled hair, and, synchronized dancing.
The classic K-drama aesthetic.
Yeah, and you think you're in for a couple of hours of just pure escapism, right? Like a complete vacation for your brain.
Sure, just turning off and enjoying the spectacle.
But then, halfway through the season, you realize you have been totally tricked. You've been tricked into digesting this incredibly razor-sharp, basically a Marxist critique on class warfare, systemic oppression, and the collapse of patriarchal violence.
It is honestly the ultimate Trojan horse technique.
Yeah, that's such a good way to put it.
I mean, the creators, they lure you in with the spectacle. And once you're comfortably invested in the romance and the bright colors, the trapdoor just opens beneath you.
And that is exactly our mission for the deep dive today. We're unpacking a truly fascinating academic paper by Aljan A. Paris.
It's a brilliant paper.
It really is. And it analyzes the 2016 South Korean historical television drama, Hwarang, the Poet Warrior Youth.
Right.
Because for anyone casually scrolling past this on a streaming platform, it just looks like a fun, visually stunning show filled with beautiful young men.
Yeah, the flower boys, as they're called.
Exactly. But Paris' paper reveals that this show actually weaponizes its own glamour. It uses ancient history to dissect the anxieties of modern youth.
Yes, and it dismantles toxic masculinity while questioning the fundamental legitimacy of political power itself.
Which is heavy stuff for a pop drama.
It is. But you have to understand, the historical drama genre in South Korea, which is known as saeguk, is famously dual purpose.
No, so.
Well, historically, state-sponsored media used the genre for myth-making, right? Portraying ancient rulers as these benevolent unifiers to build up modern patriotism.
So like propaganda, kind of.
Basically, yeah. But more recently, saeguk has evolved into this really subversive space for social critique.
Oh, interesting.
And what makes the paper's analysis of Hwarang so compelling is that the series just completely ignores the sweeping, large-scale war strategies of older generals.
Right. It's not about huge armies clashing.
No, it zooms all the way in on micropolitics. It's entirely obsessed with how a society socializes and ultimately traumatizes its youth.
So to understand how this Trojan horse actually functions, we have to look at the foundational myth that the show is dismantling.
Right, the actual history.
Yeah, because the series is set in the ancient Silla Kingdom, and it centers on a historically real institution called the Hwarang, which translates to the Flower Knights.
Yes, the Flower Knights.
And from what I understand, the culturally ingrained history of the Hwarang paints them as these fiercely loyal, almost semi-divine patriots who willingly sacrifice themselves to unify Korea.
Right. That is the pristine textbook version of the myth, a very clean, very sanitized narrative of noble youths serving the state.
But the show doesn't go with that version.
Not at all. The paper points out that the show just takes a hammer to that pristine myth.
They just shatter it.
Exactly. In the narrative of Hwarang, this elite academy is not born out of noble patriotism. It's the product of intense political paranoia.
Paranoia from the queen, right?
Yes. Queen Regent Jisoo. She is terrified of the ruling aristocracy plotting against the throne. So she creates the Hwarang Academy not as a prestigious training ground, but as an elaborate trap.
Wait, a trap?
Yeah. She forces the rival elites to send their sons to this academy under the guise of, protecting the king. But in reality, she's taking their children as political hostages to ensure the fathers fall in line.
Oh, wow. So it's less like the noble knights of the Round Table and more like a glorified high-stakes detention center.
That's exactly what it is.
The state is essentially saying, step out of line and your kid doesn't come home.
Right. It completely upends the traditional narrative. It frames the foundation of this legendary institution as an act of oppressive state violence.
That's incredibly dark.
It is. And what the academic paper highlights is how the show's creators use these incredibly deliberate stylistic choices to make this ancient oppression feel visceral for a modern audience.
So they don't just use like typical dark, moody lighting.
No, Paralysis actually compares the aesthetic to another show, The King, Eternal Monarch. Instead of using the dark, somber, heavy cinematic tones you usually find in serious historical epics, Hwarang is overwhelmingly bright.
Yeah, it's super colorful.
Hyper-saturated color schemes, anachronistic pop music, incredibly fast, kinetic editing.
Which I can see being kind of jarring if you're expecting a traditional moody historical piece. But how does turning up the saturation and the tempo actually help deliver a socio-political critique?
Well,
doesn't that just make it feel more like a music video?
That is the genius of the contrast, actually. The bright, fast-paced atmosphere creates this sensory overload that directly mirrors the digital ecosystem of millennials and Gen Z.
Oh, so it's speaking their visual language.
Exactly. The paper argues this aesthetic serves as a deliberate psychological bridge. The creators are addressing ancient systemic trauma in the visual language of modern youth culture.
So underneath the bright silks and the upbeat music, these ancient teenagers are crumbling under the exact same pressures young people face today.
Yes. Intense academic and societal expectations, a total lack of social mobility, and the suffocating feeling of trying to forge an identity in a world that has already predetermined your worth.
Right.
The glossy surface doesn't hide their misery. It emphasizes how they're forced to perform perfection while they're secretly suffering.
Man, that's deep. Which means the true villain of the show isn't an evil warlord with a sword. The central antagonist is the social structure itself,
Spot on.
specifically the bone rank system, or the Gulpum.
Right, the Gulpum. The bone rank system was this brutally strict hereditary caste hierarchy in the Scylla kingdom.
And it dictated basically everything, right?
Absolutely every parameter of your existence. The bloodline you were born into determined your social status, who you were legally allowed to marry, the type of clothing you could wear.
Even what you could wear.
Oh yeah. The amount of wealth you could accumulate, and even the maximum square footage of your house.
Wait, literally the size of your house was legally capped by your bloodline.
Literally. It was that micromanaged. And to understand the political tension in the show, you really have to understand the top 2 tiers.
Okay, lay them out for me.
First, you have the sacred bone, or Seongal. These are individuals who have royal blood on both sides of their family, and they are the only ones eligible to sit on the throne.
The absolute top of the pyramid.
Exactly. Just beneath them are the true bone, or Jingle. They're the highest tier of the aristocracy, possessing immense wealth and power.
But they can't be king.
Right. Because they lack that pure double royal lineage, they are permanently locked out of the ultimate seat of power.
And the paper's analysis of how this caste system is visually enforced is just fascinating to me.
The spatial design stuff?
Yeah. Because the oppression isn't just a law written on a scroll, it is baked into the physical architecture of the show.
Yes, the geography itself is weaponized.
Exactly. The capital city, Sirabiol, is mapped out to reflect this. The Jingle aristocracy live in areas filmed almost exclusively with wide-angle shots. Everything is highly symmetrical.
Perfect lines everywhere.
Right. The buildings, the courtyards, the alignment of the pillars, they physically box the nobles into these perfect, rigid geometric shapes.
Because symmetry requires immense control to maintain. In the visual language of the show, perfect symmetry represents an unchanging status quo.
So it's like a visual prison of their own making.
Yes, it's the architectural manifestation of a society that refuses to adapt, where every single person is locked into their designated coordinate on the grid.
But then the camera takes us outside the walls of the capital.
Into the villages.
Right, where the commoners and the outcasts live. And the paper notes that this realm is defined by total spatial asymmetry.
Complete chaos.
Yeah, the camera work becomes shaky and chaotic. The architecture is totally haphazard. It's an unprotected, lawless zone where the state provides zero infrastructure.
And human life out there is considered completely disposable.
Which makes the journey of our protagonist, Sunwoo, an absolute shock to the system.
Oh, totally.
He comes from the lowest tier of that asymmetrical, chaotic outer world. So when he physically crosses the wall and steps foot into the symmetrical perfection of the capital, the paper describes his mere presence as an act of spatial pollution.
Spatial pollution. I love that term.
Isn't he great? He's basically a walking, breathing glitch in their matrix.
He really is, because the survival of the aristocratic class hinges entirely on geographic seclusion. The bone rank system only works if the wealthy never have to witness the suffering their privilege creates.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. They rely on those physical walls to keep the consequences of their hierarchy entirely out of sight.
I am struggling with the core premise here, though, when it comes to the story.
Okay, what's that?
If the rich rely on spatial segregation to maintain their supremacy, doesn't putting Sunwoo inside the Hwarang barracks alongside the Jingle elite kind of backfire?
How do you mean?
Well, if you take entitled, wealthy kids who have been taught their whole lives that they are genetically superior, and you lock them in a room with someone from the absolute bottom of society, I mean, history tells us those rich kids usually just close ranks.
Right, they gang up.
Yeah, they bully the outsider and reinforce the caste system. Does putting the rich and poor in the same room essentially destroy the caste system, or does it just make it worse? How does this show bypass that grim reality?
It is a vital question, and the paper addresses it beautifully. The show actually doesn't bypass that reality at all.
Oh, they do close ranks?
Initially, absolutely. The rich kids try to humiliate and destroy Sunwoo, but you have to remember the barracks are a pressure cooker designed by the queen to traumatize everyone equally.
Right. It's a hostage situation for the rich kids, too.
Exactly. The grueling shared physical suffering of their training regimen begins to erode their abstract ideas of class. The walls of the barracks force inescapable physical proximity.
And they can't leave.
No, they can't. And sustained physical proximity under duress breeds empathy. When these young men are forced to bleed together, endure punishment together, and physically rely on one another to survive the Queen's deadly trials, they can no longer view each other as statistics.
Or as biological inferiors.
Exactly. The rich kids begin to realize that their privilege is really just a gilded cage, and Sunwoo realizes the elites are just as trapped by the adults as he is.
Wow.
That shade trauma creates an empathy that becomes the ultimate weapon against the caste system.
And that weaponization extends beyond just physical space. Right. It bleeds directly into the language they use.
Yes, the linguistic power dynamics.
Right. The paper spends a significant amount of time breaking down how language works in the show, specifically focusing on Sunwoo's original name.
Which is such a crucial detail.
Because before he appropriates the name Sunwoo to infiltrate the capital, he is known in his village simply as Dogbird, or Gaithae in Korean.
The violence of being unnamed in a society completely obsessed with lineage cannot be overstated.
It's basically stripping away his humanity.
Exactly. In the Scylla Kingdom, if you do not have a proper family name, you are legally not a person. You're essentially viewed as a breathing piece of farm equipment.
That is brutal.
But the pseudonym Dogbird captures his ideological paradox perfectly. The dog aspect represents the very bottom tier of servitude. A dog is grounded in the dirt, entirely dependent, and conditioned to remain loyal even when beaten by its master.
Right. But the bird aspect represents the exact opposite of that.
Right.
A bird is completely untethered. It possesses the total freedom to fly right over those massive stone walls the ruling class built to keep the poor out.
So when he finally claims the name Sunwoo, he is not simply putting on a disguise to sneak in. He is engaging in a radical appropriation of upper-class power.
He's claiming personhood.
Yes. And this becomes incredibly potent when the series focuses on his education. The Jingle aristocracy used their absolute monopoly on literacy to control the political, legal, and religious narratives of the kingdom.
Because if you can't read the laws, you can't challenge them.
Exactly. So to teach a commoner to read was a direct threat to the state's security.
So all those agonizing scenes of Sunwoo struggling to learn to read and write, they aren't just there for, like, cute character development.
Not at all.
They are an allegory for the democratization of education. He is basically stealing fire from the gods.
That's a perfect analogy.
And he doesn't just learn to read so he can quietly assimilate into the upper class. He uses their own tools to punch up.
Yes, his first essay.
Right. The paper highlights his very first philosophical essay in the academy. Instead of adopting the polite, flowery rhetoric of the nobility, he uses his newfound literacy to brutally critique the regime.
It's such a powerful moment.
He writes that a true ruler doesn't hide behind castle walls while the people suffer. His argument implies that power shouldn't come from a sacred bone bloodline. It should stem from a lived experience of the world's harsh realities.
And that essay represents a profound ideological earthquake within the academy. Sunwoo introduces the concept of merit and empathy into a space built entirely on inherited privilege.
It totally shifts the paradigm.
It does. But intellectual rebellion is only half the battle. We are still talking about a martial arts academy after all.
Right. They have to fight.
Right. The paper pivots to examine how these youths physically manifest their rebellion against the system. They don't just mimic the brutal violence of the older generation. The series leans heavily into the dualistic nature of its own title, the poet-warrior youth.
The show leans into the aesthetic of Ganmanam, which translates to Korean soft masculinity.
Yes.
And what blew my mind in the paper is that this isn't just a modern K-pop invention grafted onto the past to look cool. The historical Hwarang really did wear makeup, dress in vibrant silks, and burn incense before going into battle.
They did. The drama takes those historical facts and, amplifies them for television. But the critical argument Paris makes is that this aesthetic choice is deeply political.
How so?
By combining traditionally masculine disciplines like lethal swordsmanship with traditionally female-coded activities, like applying cosmetics, writing poetry, and performing synchronized dance, these young men are forging an entirely new paradigm of power.
So they are actively rejecting the toxic patriarchy of their fathers.
Precisely.
But, how does wearing makeup and writing poetry actually dismantle an oppressive regime? Like, I can see why it would annoy their conservative fathers, but how does it function as an actual political mechanism?
To understand that, we really have to look at the patriarchal structure they're fighting against.
Okay.
The older generation measures a man's value on a strictly vertical axis. In their worldview, masculinity is defined by dominance, the ability to inflict death, and absolute unwavering stoicism.
Like the classic tough guy.
Exactly. You do not show emotion, you only cause pain. It is an isolating, hyper-competitive model that keeps the elite divided and easy for the queen to control.
Divide and conquer.
Right. But by embracing art, emotional vulnerability, and shared physical aesthetics, the Hwarang subvert that vertical hierarchy. They build a horizontal brotherhood.
A completely flat structure.
Yes, they create a network of mutual care and solidarity that the state simply cannot penetrate or manipulate.
That dynamic is perfectly encapsulated in that sword dance scene the paper highlights.
Oh, the performance for the diplomats?
Yeah, the Hwarang are forced to perform for hostile foreign diplomats. It is this incredibly tense sequence that blends lethal martial arts with elegant synchronized court dancing.
It's a beautiful scene.
It is. And if we think about traditional Western action tropes, your stoic lone wolves who never flinch and solve every problem is usually framed as a weakness.
Right, showing fear is a fatal flaw in those movies.
Exactly. But during this dance, the camera deliberately avoids the wide shots of the action. It pushes in for extreme close-ups on the young men's faces.
We see their vulnerability.
Yes. We see them sweating. We see their profound anxiety. We see them making eye contact to reassure one another.
Because the choreography of the dance physically requires them to surrender their individual ego. If one of them tries to be the alpha, if one of them tries to out-macho the rest, the entire formation collapses.
And they could literally kill each other with the live blades.
Exactly. Their strength does not come from individual brute force. Their strength is entirely derived from their shared vulnerability and their implicit trust in the collective.
So they are essentially proving that empathy is a more effective survival tool than dominance.
Yes, which sets the stage for the ultimate climax of this ideological war in the show.
Because if the old ways of ruling, the violence, the bone rank system, the lack of empathy are entirely broken, then what actually makes a leader legitimate?
The million-dollar question.
Right. The series answers this by contrasting Sun Wu with the character of King Jin-young, who spends most of the show hiding under the pseudonym Jidui.
And the psychological friction between these two characters really drives the central thesis of the paper. King Jin-young is a sacred bone. He is the rightful heir to the throne by blood.
But he's not in power.
No, because his mother, Queen Jisoo, deemed him too weak to protect himself. He has lived his entire life in exile, constantly running from assassins.
So he is a king in name, but he is completely powerless and disconnected from his own country.
Exactly. The narrative forces him to undergo a radical stripping of his privilege. To become a leader, he has to hide his royal identity, enter the Hwarang as a commoner, and earn the respect of his peers by bleeding in the dirt alongside them.
He has to earn his status through action, while Sun Wu operates from the absolute inverse position.
Right.
Because Sun Wu grew up as an untouchable outcast, he views the structural flaws of the aristocracy with a clarity the king could never possess. The bone rank system hasn't insulated Sun Wu, it has only ever crushed him.
Yes, his perspective is entirely different.
So when he discovers his own power and influence within the Hwarang, the show sets up what feels like a very predictable narrative trap.
The classic Return of the King trope.
Exactly. I mean, in almost every fantasy or historical epic, when the rugged peasant hero discovers that his humble sidekick is actually the exiled rightful king, the peasant just drops to his knees.
He pledges his undying loyalty.
Right, to restore the natural order of the bloodline. But Sun Wu completely shatters that expectation.
He doesn't bow.
No. When he finds out Jidui is the king, he basically refuses to validate the sacred bone hierarchy. He doesn't bow. Instead, he steps up as an ideological counterweight.
It's so subversive.
He looks the king in the eye and essentially demands that the king prove he is worthy of the throne. He tells him that a real ruler must be terrified of the people's suffering.
It is a profound rejection of the divine right of kings. And Paris's paper synthesizes this dynamic beautifully. In the world of Hwarang, true political legitimacy has absolutely zero connection to hereditary rights, pure bloodlines, or the state's monopoly on violence.
It's entirely conditional.
Yes, legitimacy is a conditional mandate. It must be continuously earned through a deep experiential understanding of the marginalized.
So Sun Wu refuses to let the king rely on his DNA. He forces the king to govern using the horizontal empathy he learned inside the barracks.
Precisely. The institution that the nobility built to hold hostages and maintain their oppressive grip on society.
The Hwarang.
Yes, it becomes the exact crucible that melts down their entire caste system.
Oh, the irony is perfect.
It is. The youth look at the prejudice, the hierarchy, and the generational trauma their parents handed them, and they simply refuse to carry it forward.
Which is why the show is so much more than just a historical romance. It argues that any institution built on exclusion and inherited privilege is inherently fragile, just waiting to be dismantled by the very people it seeks to control.
Absolutely.
So, bringing this all back to you listening today, the Trojan horse of Hwarang delivers a timeless blueprint. It tells us that the true engines of systemic change are not found in the halls of power or in the hands of older men plotting in symmetrical rooms.
No, they're found in youth solidarity.
Exactly. In the radical, unyielding power of empathy and in the conscious rejection of violence as a measure of worth.
You know, historical fiction is rarely just a lesson about the past. It is almost always a mirror held up to the anxieties of the present.
That's very true.
And there is a final, highly provocative thought drawn from the paper's themes that I think is really worth dwelling on.
What's the takeaway?
Well, the central mechanism for destroying the ancient caste system in this narrative was physical proximity.
Right, the barracks.
Yes. The rich and the poor were forced into the same barracks. They had to share the same physical space, eat the same food, and endure the same suffering.
They couldn't avoid each other.
Exactly. That unavoidable physical proximity was the absolute prerequisite for generating the empathy needed to dismantle their societal divides.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But if we look at our modern world, we are accelerating in the exact opposite direction.
Yeah, we really are.
We are increasingly remote, hyper-individualized, and economically segregated. The wealthy and the working class almost never share physical spaces anymore.
No, everything is separated.
So the critical question becomes, where are our modern barracks?
Wow.
If shared physical proximity is what generates the solidarity required to fix broken institutions, how do we achieve that empathy today? How do we do that when the walls keeping us apart are no longer made of stone, but of digital algorithms, private servers, and exclusive zip codes?
If we never have to look each other in the eye, how do we ever realize we are fighting the same battle? Think about your own walls. Until next time.